In Modern, before the Yorion ban, 80 card decks used to be somewhat common, but now it's unheard of. But in a recent Modern challenge, Young Dingo took a Nibdelite deck with 80 cards in the main deck to a top 4 finish. But as you can tell, this list has no cards from Mother of Machines. So we're going to be adding 3 new cards to this list. The first card that we're going to be adding is Omnath, Locus of All. This is a 4-drop that you have to pay 2 life to cast. That says if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes black instead. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card if it has 3 or more colored mana symbols in its mana cost. If you do, add 3 mana of any combination of its color and put it into your hand. If you don't, reveal it and put it in your hand. The second card from Mother Machine that we're going to be adding is Rin and Realm Breaker. This is a 3 mana planeswalker with the passive that says land you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. +1, up to 1 target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with vigilance, hexproof, and haste until your next turn. It's still a land. -2, mill 3 cards. You put a permanent card from among those milled cards into your hand. And -7, you get an emblem with you may play lands and cast permanent spells from your graveyard. The 2 most important parts of this card is the fact that you make all of your lands any color, which in a 5-color deck is super important. And the -2 is just card advantage right off the bat, and you can do it 2 turns in a row. And the final card that we're going to be adding is Invasion of Alara, which is a 5 mana battle. This reads, when Invasion of Alara enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library until you exile 2 non-land cards with mana value 4 or less. You may cast one of those 2 cards without paying its mana cost. Put one of them into your hand, then put the other exiled cards this way on the bottom of your library in random order. And if you defeat this battle, it flips into Awaken the Maelstrom. And while this seems like a hard thing to achieve, in this video, we are going to flip this multiple times. So we are going to be taking this list through a League of Modern and seeing how powerful the new cards are in the Modern metagame. Match number 1, we're on the play, and we only have 1 land, so we got them all. Our 6 has no land, so we're going to 5. Our 5 looks fine. We're going to put back Vindicate and an Omnath. And when we're going to go Forest into an Abundant Growth. And we draw a Wrenn. When it goes turn 1 Swamp into an Inquisition, taking our Rim. We draw an Adatha Triumph. We'll just play Foothills and pass. Opponent plays an Inquisition, whiffing. Then fetch Shocks and plays out a Ragavan. We draw Ring Delight for turn, so we'll play Vista and plan on cycling the Triumph. Opponent untaps, goes straight to combat, and they exile a Valky off of our top. They play out a Foothills and then cast our Valky. And then we'll fetch out a Plains and cycle this Triumph, drawing a Prismari command. Then we play a Misty for turn and hold up Prismari command. They go straight to combat, attacking us for 4. We take it and they exile an Eldamri's Call off the top of our deck. They fetch out a Forest, then play a Blood Moon. So in response, we will fetch up an island, and Blood Moon's fine. And on the end step, we will kill the Valky and create a treasure, which means that we can somehow cast a 5-color spell with Blood Moon on the battlefield. And in response, they bolt their Valky, which doesn't prevent the creation of a treasure, because this is 2 separate targets. We top deck an Abundant Growth, but we're just going to slam this Niv, and Niv draws us 4 cards. Great turn for us. Opponent untaps and attacks them with Rag. We will block. And after combat, they pitch a Fury, killing our Niv. Then plays out a Ridden 6, taking up on a Bloodstained Mire and playing it for turn. Untap, and we draw Bring to Light. So we'll Abundant Growth our island, drawing a land for turn. We'll play out our Wrenn, tick up on a Wooded Foothills, and play that for turn, holding up a Lightning Helix. And on our end step, they stomp our Ridden 6. They untap, tick up with Ridden 6, getting a Wooded Foothills. Play it for turn and cast out a Bone Crusher. And on the end step, we will Lightning Helix the Bone Crusher. That resolves, we untap, finding land for turn. We will tick up on our Triumph, cast out a Bring Delight, grabbing an Omnath and casting it. And in response to drawing, they terminate our Wrenn. And we draw the 5-drop Omnath, so we'll play Temple Guard and pass. When it ticks up with Wrenn, they cast a Kulakon's command, dealing 2 to Wrenn, and picking up a Ragavan. They dash Ragavan, killing our Wrenn 6. We draw another Omnath for turn. We'll cast out another Bring Delight, grabbing a 4-drop Omnath. We cast out, drawing, getting a land for turn, so we'll just play out Verdant, gain 4 life, and pass the opponent. Opponent untaps, plays out an Inquisition, taking our Abrupt Decay, takes up with Wrenn 6, and plays out a Ragavan. We draw a Utopia Sprawl, we'll enchant our Forest, play out our Windswept Teeth, then cast our Kai's Guile Entwined, and attack the Wrenn 6 down to 3 loyalty. An opponent scoops them up. Let's get on to sideboarding. We're going to take it to Fairy, Elesh Norn, Kai's Guile, and a new Omnath for 2 Spell Pierces and 2 Endurances. For game 2, our starter looks perfectly fine. Opponent goes turn 1 Ragavan. We top deck a Prismatic Ending. We'll fetch out a basic Plains and ending this. Opponent shocks in a Blood Crypt and Inquisitions us. Taking our Eldamri's Call. We draw a Windswept Teeth for turn. We'll actually play that. Opponent plays a Tap Tomb, and we'll fetch out a Ketria Triumph. Drawing Prismari command. We'll fetch a basic island and cast our Teferi out. And we'll just stick up. Opponent untaps and casts a Riveteer's Charm, killing our Teferi. Then runs out a Den of the Bugbear. We find a Helix for turn. We'll just pass, holding up our instance. Opponent plays out a Wrenn. And on the end step, we'll cast our Prismari command, making a treasure and drawing 2 and looting. We draw 2, and we'll get rid of a Helix and a Kai's Guile. We draw another Teferi for turn. We'll cast Utopia Sprawl, naming naming black. I hope we can untap and play Niv or Invasion of Alara. They tick up Ren and pass. You find an ending. We're going to play Invasion of Alara, and we get Kaya's Guile and Ren. So we'll cast the Ren for free, and I think we can put a forest in our hand, and we'll down tick our Ren, finding an Abundant Growth, play out our forest, and then Abundant Growth, our Catchery Triumph, drawing into a Vindicate. On our end step, they cast a Riveteer's Charm, exiling Tarmogoyf, Besage you in a swamp. Opponent plays the swamp out and activates into the Bugbear. They attack, killing our Ren and making a 1/1 Goblin. Then they tick up Ren in 6. We untap, drawing a land. So we're just going to slam our Niv. Only drawing 1 card, oof. We'll play our tapped land and hope that it's not too bad. Opponent plays a Bloodstained Mire and fetches out another swamp. Ticks up Ren, getting another Bloodstained Mire. They activate Din and attack in. So we'll block the 1/1. And opponent passes. We untap, drawing a Vista, and we're going to attack the Evasion. So the Invasion goes down to 1. We'll play our Vista, fetch out a mountain, cast our Ren, and down tick on the Invasion. And we get to transform this, let's go! And we'll target ourselves, destroying a Ren. So we draw 2 more lands. We do not put an artifact into the play, and then we'll copy our Niv Mizzet. I'm so confused. Oh, we don't get a copy of it, never mind. Then we'll cast a Vindicate, destroying their Den of the Bugbear, and we'll pass back. And opponent scoops them up. Let's get into match number 2. Match number 2, we're on the play with a great hand. Turn 1, we'll fetch up a forest and cast an Abundant Growth on it. Ooh, looks like we might be able to burn with a doubled Helix hand, and that's the case. Oh my god. We're going to run our mountain and pass the opponent. On their upkeep, they Rift Bolt us down to 16. Then they cast out a Goblin Guide, attacking, revealing an Invasion of Alara, and we'll Lightning Helix this. And no land from the opponent. So we'll play our Wooded Foothills, and we'll growth that. Drawing another Evasion. Opponent suspends another Rift Bolt and passes. We find an Omnath. They cast a Rift Bolt in their upkeep, then skewer the Critic Sus. On their end step, we will Lightning Helix the opponent. We find a Sprawl for turn. We'll put it on our forest, naming white so that we can Eldamri's Call here. They tap out for a Swift Spear. Attack us for 1, we go down to 15. On the end step, we will cast a Call, and we'll grab another Omnath. We find a Teferi, and we'll play out an Omnath, hope we can find a land. No dice for us, so we gotta pass back. Opponent attacks in, we're not gonna block, and they cast a Bolt, taking us down to 10. We untap, find a land, go up to 14, fetch out of Plains, and opponent scoops them up before we can do anything. Let's get on to sideboarding. We're going to take out 2 Evasions of Alara, the new Omnath, Hellish Norn, and 2 Teferis for Dovin's Veto, a place set of Chalices, and 2 Spell Pierce. Game 2, our start is a little slow, but 2 Chalices is pretty good. Opponent goes turn 1, Lava Spike. We find a Wooded Foothills, we'll fetch out a Forest, and we'll cast a Utopia Sprawl, naming blue. Opponent plays an Advantage and casts a Lava Spike, and 2 Skewer. We draw a Watery Grave, we'll cast out Chalice for 1, and play a tap Temple Garden. Opponent plays a tapped land into an Eidolon. We top deck a Ren. We're going to play out Swamp and cast a Chalice for 2. They play a tapped Vantage and attack in for 2. We untap, finding a Binding. We'll play out a tapped Watery Grave and cast out this Binding. We'll play tapped Psychic Foundry. We draw a Vista for turn. Cast out a Ren. Milling over 3 lands. We'll put a Heath to the hand and play that out for turn. And opponent scoops them up. Let's get into match number 3. Match number 3, our starter has a Ren in 6 and a fetch land, and it looks like we're up against Burn again. We top deck a Call, we'll play out Vista, getting a Forest, and enchanting it with Utopia Sprawl. Naming white, I think. Opponent plays a Canyon out and attacks in for 1, passing back to us. We top deck a Mountain. We're going to play Swamp and Vindicate this with Spear. Unclear what the best line is this turn. On the end step, they Helix us down to 14. They fetch Shock and then cast a Skullcrack into Skewer. We draw Ren in 6 for turn. We'll play out a Triumph and find an Omnath this turn. They untap and crack their Canyon, then Lava Spike us. And on the end step, we cast our Call, and we just gotta pick this Omnath. We find a Bring Delight. So we'll play out our Mountain, play Utopia Sprawl, naming blue, then cast a Bring Delight, grabbing Kaya's Guile, and we are going to cast that, gaining 4 life and making a 1/1. They untap, play out a land, and Searing Blaze our 1/1. We find a Prismari Command, we'll cast out our Omnath, and no land. We could still die here, fingers crossed. They bolt us into a Skullcrack, no! Let's get on to sideboarding. And it's the same sideboarding plan as last game. Game 2, we're on the play with a great hand. Turn 1, we'll fetch out a Forest and cast a Growth, drawing an Omnath, great draw. Then it goes turn 1 Mountain into a Goblin Guide, drawing us a Windswept Heath. We find a Sprawl off the top, and we'll fetch Shock here. Cast Utopia Sprawl in our Forest, naming blue, and cast out this Chalice. Opponent untaps and attacks us, revealing Teferi. Shocks in a Sacred Foundry, then casts a Boros Charm, and we're down to 8. We'll play out our Teferi, bouncing the Goblin Guide, drawing a Utopia Sprawl, and then we'll play Island out. And I just realized that was the wrong land to play. They untap, casting a Goblin Guide into the Chalice, into a Skullcrack. We top deck a Helix, play our Mountain, and then cast our Ren. Down ticking, grabbing a Verdant Catacombs. They shock in a Sacred Foundry and skewer us, and then skewer us again, but we have a Lightning Helix. We untap, drawing a Vindicate. We'll play out our Omnath, playing out a Vista, gaining 4 life, picking up Teferi, ticking up Ren, attacking for 3, then passing. And the upkeep will fetch out a land to gain 4 more, getting a Swamp. They untap and crack the Canyon right away, and scoop them up. Let's get into game 3. Game 3, our starter's pretty good. Opponent goes turn 1 Swift Spear. We top deck a Growth. We'll go turn 1 Forest, and we'll name black so that we can decay next turn. Opponent spikes us pre-combat and attacks in for 2. then passes. We top deck a Bring to Light. We'll play out a Heath, Abundant Growth to Heath, draw in another Bring to Light, and then we'll decay the Swift Spear. They drew a land and cast out a Lightning Bolt into a Suspended Rift Bolt. We top deck a Breeding Pool. We'll enchant our forest with a Sprawl, naming red, and then shock in a Breeding Pool. They cast a Rift Bolt, and we will counter this with Veto. They play out a Canyon and Boros Charm us. We untap Finding an Island, and we'll Bring to Light, grabbing an Omnath, drawing a card, and playing the island, gaining 4. Opponent plays a Mire and passes. We top deck a Verdict. We'll cast out our Wrenn, picking up a Windswept Teeth, land that out for turn, gaining 4 life. In response, they crack a Canyon and Boros Charm us. We'll Utopia Sprawl our forest again, naming white, and then attacking for 4. Opponent cracks a Canyon, and in response, we'll fetch, gaining 4 more life. And before we find a land, they concede. Let's get into match number 4. Match number 4, we're on the play with a great hand. We're going to lead on turn 1 Vista and not cast the growth just yet, so we can go turn 3 Wrenn. Opponent goes turn 1 Triumph. We top deck a Valky. We'll play a Plains, fetch out a Forest, and enchant the Plains, drawing a Foothills. Opponent goes land go. We top deck a Tomb, we'll shock that in, and cast out our Wrenn, and we'll down tick, grabbing it to Fairy. And on the end step, they bolt down our Wrenn, and our opponent plays out a Risen Reef. We top deck a Utopia Sprawl, and we'll enchant our Forest, naming white. We'll fetch shock for Steam Vents, and play out our Teferi. And we'll down tick on our growth, bouncing it, and drawing a card. Top decking a Bring to Light. Then we'll cast out the Binding, killing the Risen Reef. Opponent plays a tap Steam Vents, and then bounces our Leyline Binding with their Teferi, putting a Flood Strand onto the battlefield. And we top deck our Wrenn for turn. We'll Binding their Risen Reef again, play our Mountain, tick up to Fairy. We'll cast a growth on our Mountain, picking up an Omnath. Then we'll cast out our Wrenn, ticking up on our Steam Vents, and killing their Teferi. Opponent runs out of Omnath and has a fetch land, then shocks in a Sacred Foundry, and gets another land, dealing with our Teferi, and they cast out a Fury, killing our Wrenn Realm. We top deck a Watery Grave for turn. We'll shock in a Watery Grave and cast our Bring to Light. We'll grab a Niv Mizzet, drawing a Helix and a Teferi, and we'll Lightning Helix's Fury now. Cast out a Teferi, bouncing our Leyline Binding, getting the Reef back, then cast out another Reef, putting a Heath into play, and putting a Misty in play. They shock in a Temple Guard, and then cast a Solitude, and I think that's just going to do it. We're so far behind, we'll just get into sideboarding. For sideboarding, we're going to bring in a Magus and take out a Kaya's Guile. For game 2, our starter is a little too threat light, so we're going to mull. We'll keep our 6, putting back a Windswept Teeth. We'll go turn 1 Misty for a Forest, and cast a growth on it, finding an ending. Opponent goes turn 1 Oath, revealing a Teferi. We top deck an Invasion of Alara. Opponent casts another Oath, finding a Windswept Teeth. We untap, finding a Temple Garden, and we'll shock that in and cast our Valky, and we'll take the Risen Reef. Opponent plays the Stomping Ground, and then bounces our Valky. We top deck a Call, we'll play out Valky again, and we'll take the Risen Reef again. At our island and pass. They play a Windswept Teeth for turn, then ending our Valky. We untap, drawing a Guile, play our Swamp, and fetch out a Plains. We'll cast our Eldamri's Call, grabbing a Magus, and cast that out. In response, they fetch out a Plains and cast an Eldamri's Call, getting a Fury. They tick up to Fairy and then evoke out a Fury. Then cast out a Risen Reef, gaining an island onto the battlefield. Then Prismatic ending our Abundant Growth. We draw a Helix for turn, and we'll just cast this Kaya's Guile out, getting a 1/1 and making them sacrifice. They down tick Teferi, bouncing our token. Then cast out another Teferi, bounce their Oath, cast out Oath again, revealing a Wrenn 6. We draw an Omnath, which we cannot cast. We'll Prismatic ending the Teferi. They run out an Omnath, cast out a Wrenn, tick up, getting a Windswept Teeth, fetch immediately, getting 4 mana, and buy Kahira to hand. We top deck a Teferi, which does not look good here, so we're gonna play a Teferi out. We'll bounce our Omnath, and we draw a Bring to Light. They cast out another Omnath, play out a Misty, fetch shock, cast out a Fury, then cast out a Kahira. We find a red source. We'll shock it in and cast a Bring to Light. We'll grab a Supreme Verdict, casting it right away. Untaps, cast out another Omnath, ticks up Wrenn, and plays a land out, gaining 4 life. And we'll cast out our Evasion, hope it's a good one. And we have to pick a Wrenn 6, and we'll put a Niv Mizzet to our hand. We'll tick up on a Misty Rainforest and play that out. It runs out another fetch land, making 4 mana, and they fetched again, but they failed to find. They attack down our Wrenn 6. We untap, find a Wood Foothills. We'll cast out our Omnath, and they Solitude it before we can draw a card. We find a Triumph, so we'll fetch right away for a Mountain, and we have to Helix the Wrenn 6. Opponent plays a Misty, gains for life, and ticks up Wrenn. Taxins for 7. We untap, drawing a Guile, so we'll cast out our Niv, finding 4 cards. We'll play out a Triumph and hold up Kaya's Guile. Opponent casts a Titanian Protector of Argoth. Guardian Windswept Teeth, get that back, and we have to Helix this now. In response, they fetch, getting a 5/3. And it seems like they're out of lands because they failed to find again. They get a Windswept Teeth back and gain 4. They attack in with Omnath, and we'll just let that happen. Play another land out, getting 4 mana. Tick up with Wrenn and pass. We draw a Prismatic Vista, which does nothing. So we're going to lead on Teferi. That resolves. We'll attack our Invasion and cast a Bring Bring Delight, grabbing an Omnath, drawing a Growth, we'll fetch, shocking in a Stomping Grounds, cast out our Rin, down tick on the invasion, we'll target ourselves, destroying Rin in 6, we draw a Leyline Binding, we'll down tick, bouncing the Elemental token, drawing a Breeding Pool for turn, we'll Leyline Binding, killing the Omnath, cast an Abundant Growth on our Triome, and draw another land. Don't cast a Prismatic Ending, killing our Omnath, attacks down our Rin in 6, and passes back. We draw a Leyline Binding, add a Heath, and attacking for 7. Pick Teferi up and pass, holding up our instance. They attack our Teferi, we'll entwine our Kaya's Guile, and opponent scoops him up. What a crazy game. And their hand was all lands in a Rin. Let's get into game number 3. Game 3, our hand's a little too weak, so we got them all. Our 6 is quite good. We'll put back a Pending. Opponent goes turn 1 Misty. We'll go turn 1 Forest and sprawl it, naming white. They shock in a Steam Vents and cast out a Rin. Taking up, getting a Misty back. We draw a Guile. We'll fetch shock, get an Overgrown Tomb, and cast a Vindicate. They play a Heath into a Teferi, bouncing our Sprawl. We top deck a Triome, we'll enchant our Forest, and then play out our Triome. Opponent ticks up and puts Kahira into hand, and we top deck an Invasion, shock in a Tomb, and cast out our Omnath, drawing a Ketria Triome. Opponent casts out a Solitude on their main phase, killing our Omnath, and then tick up Teferi, draw land for turn. We'll fetch out Plains and entwine this Kaya's Guile. Opponent ticks Teferi up, plays out an Oath of Nissa, reveals a Fury, then plays out a Rin in 6, killing our Spirit, and then casts out a Kahira. We top deck another Invasion, so I guess we have to cast this, even though it's not going to do much. And we'll put a Lightning Helix to hand, playing out our Triumph. Opponent ticks up Teferi and Rin and plays out a land. And we find a Binding for turn, so we'll cast that out and take out the Teferi, and they besage you our Binding in response. We'll grab a Steam Vents. Then we will Helix down the Rin in 6 and hold Besage you in hand. On the end step, they flash into Solitude. They attack in for 7, down tick Teferi, then play out the Oath that they bounced, revealing a Titania, play out Titania for turn, getting back a Misty, fetching, getting a 6/4 Elemental, and playing out a Rin in 6, pretty good turn from them, into another Floated Strand. We top deck a Verdict, so we'll cast out the Verdict, and play out our Besage you, passing. They tick up both Planeswalkers, play a land, and pass. We find a Teferi, we'll run that out, bouncing our Utopia Sprawl, and they Besage you that. We'll grab a Watery Grave, shock it in, and then we'll just cast out another Invasion, and we'll put a Prismatic Ending into our hand. Opponent casts out a Fury, killing our Teferi, taking up with Ren, taking up with Teferi. We untap, finding an Omnath, so we got a Prismatic Ending the Teferi, and then we'll run out our Omnath. On our end step, they bring in a Solitude, killing our Omnath. They tick up Teferi and attack in for 9, play out a Flooded Strand into another Fury. We draw a Binding for turn, but we know they have a Besage, so we should be dead here. On their upkeep, we'll cast out a Binding, take out one of the Furies, and they found the line. So we'll get on to match number 5. Match number 5, we're on the play with a fine hand. We'll lead on turn 1 Heath. Opponent goes turn 1 Coast into a Giver. We untap, drawing a Helix. So we'll play our Mountain and Helix this right away. Opponent untaps, playing a Saga into a Springleaf Drum. We top deck into Mizzets, we'll fetch out an island and play a Teferi. Teferi resolves and we'll bounce the Urza Saga, drawing a land off of the bounce. Opponent plays out the Saga again into a Sigardizade. We draw an Invasion, we tick up Teferi, shock in our Temple Garden, and pass, holding up our instance. Opponent plays Plains into an Ornithopter. On the end step, we'll cast a Guile, making a 1/1 and making them sacrifice a creature. We draw a Rin and Realm Breaker for turn. We'll cast that. We'll tick up Teferi, and we'll tick up Rin, getting another blocker, and I would really like to get the ult this game. Shock and Stomping Ground to hold up Erupt Decay, and attack in for 3. On the end step, they make a Construct. In their main phase, they use Saga again before it goes away, and they find a Shadow Spear off of the Saga. They play a Plains and then attack Teferi, so we'll decay the Construct, and they do nothing else. We draw an Elesh Norn for turn. We'll cast out our Niv Mizzet, getting only an Vindicate, and we'll down tick on the Construct and tick up our Rin. An opponent scoops him up. For sideboarding, we're going to take out an Elesh Norn and 2 new Omnaths for Force of Vigor and Fracturing Gust. For game 2, our starter has a Force of Vigor and a Bring to Light. Looks great. Opponent leads on a Seacrum Coast into a Sentinel. We draw a land for turn. We'll play that and pass. They play a Plains into a Pure Steel and attack in for 1. We draw a Rin for turn. We'll play a tap Sacred Foundry. Opponent plays a Plains into a Hammer, into another Hammer. They equip both their creatures, and we're just going to force both the hammers this turn. And we're going to pitch the Niv. We untap, finding a Binding. They play a Plains and attack in for 3. Post-combat, they play a Stoneforge, revealing a Cauldron Complete into another Pure Steel. We draw another Rin, and opponent's board just was way too good this game, so we got to scoop them up. Game 3, our starting hand's a little awkward because we don't have a Forest, but I'm going to keep. We're going to go turn 1 Besage you into an Abundant Growth, finding another Growth. Opponent plays a Giver. We're going to tap, finding a Rin, and we'll cast a Growth on our Steam Fence, finding a Valky. Opponent goes Inkmoth into a Stoneforge, getting a Cauldron, and no land for us. So we got to cast out Valky. And their hand looks pretty weak if we can draw some lands. An opponent top decked a Saga, cast a Springleaf Drum, then activate Stoneforge, putting in a Cauldron, putting us down to 13. Now we just need some lands. And that's kind of a land. We'll play that out, and we will growth it, and we'll name blue. We can also cast this Binding this turn, which is pretty awesome. Opponent plays out a Sigardizade into a Stoneforge Mystic, getting a Colossus Hammer, and we have to Leyline Binding the Sigarda's here, and they attack in for 5, and we find a land for turn. We're gonna shock into Overgrown Tomb, and I think we have to grab a Faction Gust, even though it seems really bad here. So we grab the Gust and cast it. We go back up to 20. An opponent top decks another Saga, and they attack in for 7. We find a Temple Garden, so we'll shock that in, and then cast our Wrenn and Realm Breaker, picking up on our Triumph. An opponent attacks our Wrenn, so we'll just chump block with our Valky, and our Wrenn survives at 1 loyalty. Find a land for turn, and we'll cast our Invasions of Alara, getting a Teferi and an Abrupt Decay. So we have to cast the Teferi and put Abrupt Decay in our hand. In response, they protect their Germ. We have to bounce the Saga, and we find a Helix, play land and tick up, making a 3/3. Opponent plays out a Saga and animates Inkmoth. Opponent attacks our Planeswalkers down and us with the Construct, so we'll block the Construct, and they try and give the Construct protection, so we'll just fetch, grabbing a Ketria Triumph. And post combat, they run out of Sentinel. Find an Omnath for turn, so we're going to cast out our Omnath, draw in a Utopia Sprawl for turn. We'll cast Sprawl on our Overgrown Tomb, letting them draw a card, naming red, playing out a Wrenn and 6, taking up on our Foothills, playing it for turn, gaining 4 life. We'll grab a Mountain and Lightning Helix. Opponent plays out a Stoneforge Mystic, grabbing a Colossus Hammer, playing a Hammer and equipping it to the Germ. And as long as they attack us, we are dead here. They play out another Saga and animate Inkmoth, and they aren't going to kill us, so I guess we'll block the Construct. And we go to 1. Top deck of Growth, so we'll play that, draw in a Lightning Helix, and I don't think that's going to do it for us. Yep, an opponent just has a million ways to lethal here, so we're going to have to concede. So overall, we did go 3-2 with the list, and I do think the games we lost were a little bit unfortunate draws, and combined to them being somewhat of a bad matchup. I think all of the new cards were quite good other than Omnath, Locus of All. This card, just the fact that it doesn't do anything on the turn you play it is just a little bit underpowered. But I was genuinely impressed with Invasion of Alara and Wrenn and Realm. Both of these cards were fantastic throughout the entire league. And I do think that this deck is quite powerful. If you are looking for a fun over-the-top deck every once in a while, this is definitely it for you. But I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.